Hi, my name is Raylan Apgar, and I'm here to talk about Sigmund Freud and academic psychology. So, who exactly is Sigmund Freud? Sigmund Freud was born on May 6, 1856, in Freiburg, Austria, to a Jewish family. When he was 4 years old, he moved from Freiburg to Vienna. He graduated with a medical degree in 1881 with a focus of neurobiology. He always thought of himself as a scientist rather than a psychologist, but after graduating high school, he started his own private practice and treated psychological disorders. He was heavily influenced by his friend Joseph Bureau, and Joseph eventually ended up not being friends with Freud anymore because of how much emphasis Freud would put on the sexual origins of his clients, wanting to know their dreams, wanting to know if they were to soon have what he called the Oedipus complex. He fled from Austria in 1938 from the Nazis, and he died in England on September 23rd, 1939, at age 83 from oral cancer from cigar smoking. Freud has developed many theories over his years as a neurobiologist and as a person who helped treat psychological disorders. One of his theories that he claimed was an iceberg theory, which has three parts: the conscious, the subconscious or preconscious, and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind are where your thoughts, memories, feelings, and wishes are. They can be easily retrieved to our conscious awareness, and we're just aware of where the world is in general. Your preconscious or subconscious mind, you're not necessarily aware of it, but you can recall it quickly to consciousness. It also guards the unconscious mind from going into the conscious state of mind. Your unconscious is the primary source of human behavior. You can't see it. It's where all of the repressed ideas and desires and impulses lie that can't go into our conscious, because according to Freud, all those desires and ideas were too much for our conscious minds to handle at the time. Going along with the iceberg theory, as it is shown in the picture, the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious mind, Freud also talked about something called the human psyche, which is your superego, your ego, and your id. Starting from the bottom, your id is where all your desires are that want to be fulfilled. It's your primitive, impulsive, and irrational unconscious, and the only thing that it wants is either pleasure or pain. Freud claims that this is the area that is responsible for instincts that deal with sex and aggression. Above that is your ego. That is who you are. It is your almost conscious state, but it's the mediator between the id and the world. If the reason it has to keep the id in check so the id doesn't slip into the superego and cause issues there. And the superego you can think of almost as like the Jiminy Cricket of your human psyche. It's where all your learned behaviors from your parents and society form, where your social norms come from, and it balances the ego and controls the id. And if you don't listen to your superego, that is where you get the feelings of guilt and anxiety from. So far, we have talked about the conscious, the preconscious, the unconscious, and the superego, ego, and id theories from Freud. Now we're going to talk about the psychosexual stages of development. According to Freud, children are born with a libido, their sexual pleasure urge. And for the first stage, oral, it starts between when you're a newborn till you're about 1 year old. The point of this stage is that the id needs to be dealt with. Like a baby has to be sucking on something, swallowing. The main focus is the mouth. This is also where the ego starts to develop. And according to Freud, when a baby wants something in its mouth, it is the id, which is almost like the howling demon in the basement, to be satisfied. Again, the focus is on oral activities, sucking, tasting, swallowing, anything that really has to do with the mouth. Putting hands, feet, blankets, people's hair, anything into their mouth to satisfy that id. If we do not complete this stage, the problems or the fixations we could have in the early future is addiction to smoking or eating as an oral fixation. Other ones can include biting nails, chewing gum, smoking, etc. The next stage is the anal stage. This happens between 1 year of age to 3 years. The main stage of this is it focuses on the controlling bowels and bladder. So basically toilet training. The libido is focused on the anus. And according to Freud, that children get pleasure from defecating. And this is when the ego is developed. There's 2 different types of problems you can encounter if you do not complete this stage. There's anal retentive and anal explosive. Anal retentive is when someone is very tidy, very clean, neat, they're very good at respecting authority, and they're very stubborn. Anal explosive is the opposite, where you're very messy, you're rebellious, and another thing is that you're more open to talking to people about your issues. Third stage is the phallic stage. This happens between the ages of 3 and 6. This is where the superego develops. The main focus is on the genitals and figuring out the differences between sexes. So a girl figuring out that she does not have a penis, and vice versa with a boy. The desire is on the genitals, and children become aware of this by either looking or by looking at Barbie dolls or looking at other children or seeing it on TV, whatever the case may be. So some issues you can have with this or during this time is you can have the Oedipus and Electra complex. The Oedipus complex is based off of the Greek story Oedipus, who killed his father and had sex with his mother. And essentially with Freud, this Oedipus complex lies within every boy and or girl. The boy desires to be with his mother, so he wants to get rid of his father. And because he cannot, he has something called castration anxiety. For the Electra complex, it is the same as the Oedipus complex, just flipped around. The daughter wants the father and wants the mother taken out of the picture. So something that the girl feels is she feels anger towards her mother because she does not have a penis, which is called penis envy, where a woman feels very angry towards her mother that she does not have a penis. But these complexes get resolved through identification with the same parent, so it ends. Next is the latent stage. This is between the ages of 6 until you hit puberty. The description of this is peer and social relationships and gender roles. The libido, for the most part, isn't on the surface. It's very dormant. It's not out in the open. Sexual impulses are repressed, and the main focus of this stage is learning social skills, how to build relationships, finding confidence within yourself, and learning new knowledge. The last stage is the genital stage, which is from puberty to adulthood. And the description of this is sexual desires and urges directed towards others. This is where teenagers start to have sexual experimentation. Their natural instinct is to have heterosexual intercourse pleasure, rather than self-pleasure like in the phallic stage. So an example of this would be if they had a fixation at the oral stage, they could essentially get pleasure from being kissed and having oral sex or receiving oral sex. Lastly, one of Freud's theories that is still, for the most part, around today is his interpretation of dreams that he wrote in 1900. Freud believed that dreams are the road to the unconscious mind. And this is also where he believed that your ego's defenses are lowered. He also believes that dreams can help repressed memories go up into the conscious state of mind and help cope with problems that are within the mind that are struggling with the subconscious and they cannot deal within the conscious mind. He believed that if you analyze the dreams, that your subconscious influence will influence your behavior and your feelings in your conscious state of mind. Some of the things that he talked about is an example is if your teeth are falling out in your dream, then that means you are not being true to yourself in everyday life. Another theory he has about dreams is falling could symbolize that you are out of control in your life, especially if you're falling out of a building. Another one he also said was that trains and towers and anything that's like long and pointed symbolizes a penis, and ovens and closets and other areas of that sort represent the vagina. And if you see a train going in a tunnel, it represents that you are having intercourse within your dream. As the theories were stated previous, someone could see why Freud's theories could be controversial, especially that children have a libido, which is where their sexual pleasures origin from. There are two papers. One supports expunging Freud from all psychology, from the field entirely, and keeping him in the textbooks. So the first article is called Goodbye, Freud. The Case for Exorcising the Ghost of Freud from the Field of Psychology. And it is written by Armando Simon. Some of the points that he makes within this paper is that Freud has no scientific basis for any of his theories or any of the things that he claims. A theory is something that can be experimented with. You can measure something specifically with. And with a lot of Freud's theories, there is no real experimentation behind any of it. He didn't he didn't come up with a hypothesis, gathered up people to experiment with, and collected materials, had a discussion, results of yes, this is true, or no, this is not true. Another is that a lot of Freud is just pseudoscience. It's not based on anything scientific, because Freud is not a psychologist. He is a neurobiologist. Freud would also not be taken seriously in this day and age. If somebody were to write an article about psychology, it wouldn't be taken seriously if they have no credentials. So, in Simon's mind, why would we keep Freud in a textbook if all he did was just say things and not have any sort of scientific background? Simon goes on to say that theory is an idea that can be experimented with. It can be measured. With Freud, there really is no measurement of how you can measure the unconscious mind or the subconscious mind, or experiment with, does everyone's id have the same desires and wishes, or does everybody have the same conscious thought? There is no real test of measurement on how to determine those ideas. Another thing Simon talks about is that some psychology textbooks criticize Freud's work. They talk about how he's not taken very seriously in the field of psychology. A lot of his theories are very outdated. So why would we put them in there? Lastly, Simon starts to talk about North American psychology has been stunted for almost a century because of Freud. Something Simon talks about is how Freud said that schizophrenia was never a real psychological disorder, that it was brought on by latent homosexuality, that they are going into a sort of homosexual panic, and it's the fault of the mother. He also says that a lot of people just kind of go along with Freud because they want to conform to the social psychology field and keep his name alive, even if people disagree with his theories and don't believe in them and they're all outdated. In the next article, Michael Furman responds to Armin Simon's article about getting rid of Freud out of textbooks, and he goes on to talk about a couple of points as to why Freud should stay in textbooks and why we should still talk about him. So the first thing he talks about is the famous figure phenomenon, which the theory goes with the theorist. As long as it's still relevant to society and it's still relevant to today's day and age, the theory will continue to be around, no matter what. A lot of scientific theories, as long as they are testable, will still stick around. But with something like Freud's theories where there is no scientific basis for it, it's a little different. They would most likely, for example, stay within art museums, and they would just be shown rather than talked about or used. The next point Furman talks about is how general psychology plays a big role within Freud. Most psychology courses are electives. You don't necessarily have to have them in order to graduate college. So if you don't need to take it as an elective, then you won't learn about Freud. Furman does say that if Freud were to come out as a child sex abuser or a rapist or anything along those lines, then it would be understandable that Freud would be taken out of the textbooks. But because this is not the case, and because Freud has played a huge part in the field of psychology, whether his theories are outdated or not, he should be kept in the textbook. Another point he points out is that for the most part in his classes, most students wouldn't talk. They wouldn't raise their hand, they wouldn't have any open discussions or anything along those lines. But when the professor starts talking about Freud and his psychosexual stages of development and sex in general, everybody was intrigued. And this is true. I have also been in classes where not many people talk or raise their hands, but once the professor starts talking about Freud and sex, everyone's ears perk up. This is believed to be because sex, as much as society would like to say that we're a lot more open about sex than we were way back in the day, there are still some taboos when it comes to sex talk. And talking about sex in a very open and safe environment, especially when it comes to Freud, can open up a lot of conversations that a lot of people don't typically have in a psychology course. Freud was above his time when it came to talking about sex. So to be in a day and age where sex is talked about more openly, it is a better understanding about sex. The next point that Furman makes is the movie plots. Even if in a movie Freudian theories aren't put into a movie, and that is strictly what it is based on, but seeing a character in a therapy room laying on a couch talking to their therapist and going through flashbacks of their childhood back to their adult life now, and then them leaving, going somewhere else, encountering some sort of stimuli or trigger, going back to their childhood, and having that sort of a movie is a lot more interesting to most people because you get to see the backstory of the other person and why they are the way that they are, or you get to see why they're so headstrong on defeating that villain or getting that medal or whatever really the case is. It's a lot more intriguing and it feels more personal to most audiences. Hollywood has essentially kept Freud alive in some way, shape, or form. Furman goes on and talks about the reasons why we cannot expunge Freud. One of the first is that we will fail to learn from the past. As the old saying goes, those who fail to learn from history's mistakes are bound to repeat them. Furman believes that keeping Freud in textbooks and explaining to future psychologists, psychiatrists, and psychoanalysts that certain theories and what have you, it's to keep the conversation alive and keep those ideas at bay and show that this was the thought back then. This is what society believed was normal. This is what society believed in. Let's not go back to that. Let's continue the conversation further and build our society better and have better societal standards and better norms within society than retreating back to the time of Sigmund Freud. Furman believes that if we go along with Simon's idea of expunging Freud, that these truths that lie within psychoanalysis, we will risk losing the elements of psychotherapy and hold back future progress or send us in a different direction. The last point Furman makes is that sex is powerful. Sex is a very huge part of being human and being able to connect with a person on a very deeper level. Psychologists know now more than Freud did about more of what sex gives to people nowadays. An example would be the libidos. Libidos are powerful. And if we get rid of something like this, we wouldn't be able to understand exactly what influences human behavior. Now, there are some theories that come with Freud that, in Furman's opinion, should be discarded, such as the Oedipus and the Electra complex. But more so than that, he believes that they all deserve some sort of research and clinical attention. Looking at society nowadays, something as such the Me Too movement has gotten huge in our society and has shown that sex impacts development, personality development, in both ways, not just unhealthy, but also in healthy ways. Drawing from the evidence that has been presented in this PowerPoint, it can be said that Simon is correct. Freud should be taken out of textbooks because ideas such as a boy wanting to have sex with his mother is a very insane idea that anyone would think of. Because why would a little boy or a little girl want to have sex with her father or his mother? That's insane. Why would anyone come up with an idea such as that? But this was also during a time when sex was a very taboo subject. Nobody talked about it. It was very all, no one said anything, you left it at that, you didn't have anything really to do with it. So the fact that even Freud, back in the 1900s, even thought about to have these conversations, I think is very brave. Even if a lot of the theories are not very spot on, not testable, but just having these theories and these ideas just out in the open to be talked about, I think is very interesting. The same could be said with philosophy. A lot of the things that Aristotle and everybody else said can't actually be physically measured, but we still take their ideas and how they perceive the world, we still take them into account because there are some people that truly believe that these things could happen. And when it comes to sex in general, it is a very powerful thing. It is a very intimate moment between two people. And as I stated before, I have been in psychology classes where not many people talk, not many people wanted to talk about ideas and thoughts about Maslow or about the Skinner box or about John Locke. But as soon as the professor started talking about Sigmund Freud and psychosexual stages of development, or the id, the ego, the superego, the unconscious, the conscious, and the subconscious mind, everyone's ears perked up because it was something that was interesting. We all know that we need basic survival to live. But to be able to talk about sex in a very open and safe environment with other peers who also most likely have the same questions or the same experiences, I think is a very bonding moment. Obviously, as said before, a lot of Freud's ideas and theories are a little outstanding, a little much. But it was before his time. That was the knowledge that he had at the time. And I think that should be taken into some accountability on Freud being involved in the textbook. Because history, if we get rid of it, history will repeat itself. And then we'll have a whole new generation of people thinking something much worse than what Freud believed in.